Hello, Principal Matters podcast listeners. We're so glad to be back with you today. I am with my friend Will Parker. Hi, Will.
Hi, Jen. This is one of our fan favorites, Q&As, before we jump into this week's guest, which this week's going to be Garth Larson. So you better hang on. This is going to be a great ride.
Yep, my a great conversation with Garth. I can't wait for you all to hear it. So we are going to do our fan favorite opener with a quick question. And today's question, are you ready for this, Will?
Mhm.
It is, what are the best practices for improving communication and fostering a sense of ownership among staff? This question in some variety comes up a lot. It's about communication and that sense of ownership amongst all staff. So I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'm going to bite my tongue so that you can take a whack at this one first.
Well, yeah, I'm talking to the author of some really great books on conversations. Um, so I'm just going to come back to something that's been a simple principle for me to live by, Jen, which is improving communication almost always begins with building meaningful relationship. And so, as busy as we are, and as hard as we're working, and as important as our outcomes are, nothing is more important than touching base with people, checking in on them, making sure they know you care. Having said that, for me, just like so many of the things that I explained, I've also had to become intentional about communication. And in one of my books, Messaging Matters: How to Inspire Teachers, Motivate Students, and Reach Communities, I just talk about the importance of thinking about your communication in those categories. And so, improving communication, this question was about in improving, fostering the sense of ownership among staff. So let's just talk about teachers. Um, I just think it's super important to be reflecting back with your staff the good things that you're seeing, as well as giving them a heads up and alerts on things that are coming. Those two things to me are super important. One, because giving them a heads up kind of reduces anxiety on what's getting ready to happen next. And reflecting back with them on the good things you're seeing happening, give them that sense of ownership of, hey, there's stuff going on around me all the time that maybe I don't get to see because I'm isolated in my classroom. But thankfully, my administrator reached back and told me these great things that are happening. So I'd start there, Jen, as just some things to keep in mind as I'm trying to improve communication.
Well, and I love that you're saying all that because I think that what you're referring to there is really knowing your audience. And of course, that's the best way to communicate, right? Is know who's listening and who's not. I actually think within this question is two questions. One is about communication and the other is that sense of ownership. And first of all, communication has changed so much even in the last decade or two, where we have to communicate with a lot of different modalities. A lot of principals will say to me, I send this newsletter and nobody reads it. And then I'm like, well, then stop sending the newsletter. If it's not working, don't do it. Find the modality that does work. And maybe it's coffees, maybe it's a quick 60-second video every day. Maybe it's something that you compile, AI tools. I hate to say this, but there are some amazing AI tools that you could easily, I mean, just a quick idea. You've written your newsletter, your staff might be able to use Notebook LM to turn that into a 3-minute podcast that they listen to on the way to work. We have to rethink communication rather than be frustrated that it's not working. And then in terms of sense of ownership, I really think this is ties to some of the work you and I have done on this podcast related to efficacy and the sense of ownership and pride and influence and ownership that a staff has. And again, we could talk for hours on that. It's about empowerment and sharing that leadership so that teachers don't feel like they're cogs in a wheel, but they feel like they're a really, really important part of what you're doing, what you're trying to do.
I agree. And I will add one more thing about ownership, Jen, that I think is so important. And I know no one would do this intentionally, but I just want to just point it out. If you find yourself saying I a lot, change it to us, because this is not, even if you're a solo administrator or you're on a team of administrators, whatever the work that you're doing in your school, your work is our work. And so it's just so important, I think, for us to examine our language to make sure that when we're stepping into the work of our school, when we see successes, we celebrate that on behalf of the whole community. When we're recognized, maybe individually for success, we accept that on behalf of the community. And you know, I've both heard great leaders say that, when something bad happens, you take the blame as the leader, you own it. and move forward. And when something good happens, you share it. You
Right.
make sure that everybody else gets credit for it.
Right. And by the way, I did a really fun PD with a district in Illinois not too long ago about public speaking for administrators. We don't talk about that enough. We talk a lot about written communication and emails, meetings, that type of thing. But standing up and working a crowd is a very specific skill. So that's another thing to think about in terms of
Mm.
communication.
Man, Jen. Okay, next time you do that PD, let me know so I can be there.
Yeah.
Um, so Principal Matters listeners, if you have questions that you'd like Jen and I to bring to the show, please reach back to either one of us. You can always reach me at my website or through my email address at williamdparker.com. Jen, how can people connect with you?
They can find me at jenschwanke.com anytime and reach out.
All right. Thank you, friends, for listening. And we're looking forward to this conversation with Garth Larson. Until next time, thanks for doing what matters, and we'll see you soon. Principal Matters Podcast, episode 423. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. This week, we're going to be talking about extinguishing fires with an assessment and grading reform. Yeah, this is a big topic with my special guest, Garth Larson. Dr. Garth Larson is the co-founder and CEO of First Educational Resources. He started his career as a high school speech and English teacher, later becoming an elementary principal, and then director of learning for the Winneconne. Is that how you pronounce it, Garth? Winneconne Community School District in Northeast Wisconsin. In 2015, he co-founded First Educational Resources to enhance student achievement nationwide. And since then, get this, over 2,000 global school districts have partnered with this company. Garth consults internationally, offering PD on key educational topics like PLCs 2.0 and learning-centered grading practices. He has authored 4 books and is the author of a new book, Extinguishing the Fires with an Assessment and Grading Reform, along with his co-authors, Becky Pepler, Don Smith, and Matt Townsley. Garth, welcome back to Principal Matters Podcast. Why don't you fill in the gaps on that intro? Tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you. And I will say this, if they want to go back and meet you like 4 years ago and 2 years ago, you were on episode 142 and episode 292 that I'll put in the show notes. But how's Garth Larson doing today? And how are you and your family?
Well, first of all, Will, thanks so much for having me back. This is by far always a highlight anytime I get to join you and obviously talk education, but also just talk life. That is something that I really appreciate about the perspective that you bring to this podcast, Will. So no, I think you did a pretty good job of summarizing it. We just keep trying to do the good work out there and support schools. We continue to grow as an organization. In a variety of different ways. We're just wrapping up kind of the spring conference season. As you know, we had a great instructional coaching summit just recently, math summit. We are adding repair kit for grading workshops all over the US right now and getting ready for summer season as well, which we've partnered with your good friend and my good friend, Jimmy Casas, to bring some Culturized Institutes throughout the US this summer as well. So for any of the listeners out there, look that one up. That is a really great event. If you're not familiar with Jimmy's work in Culturized, I'm sure Will has brought it up a few times in the podcast, but it is very transformational in terms of how we live some of those core values of Culturized in the classroom. So that's kind of keeping us busy right now. Kids are doing well. Have a freshman finishing up his first year of high school, which has been a wonderful and interesting transition, and daughter that's going into 8th grade. And then we'll have a couple high schoolers, and soon it will be empty nesting time as a family.
Garth, it's really crazy. We've known each other long enough to watch your kids grow up. And I'm just going to geek out for a few minutes with you and listeners. You can listen into me geek out. But, the first time we met was at a national middle level conference where I saw you presenting in like the exhibit hall on your, I think it was PLC 2.0. And I was so intrigued because it was like an audience of 1 or 2 people, and you were giving some of the best presentation content I had seen that whole conference. And I told you that, which is how I got you on my show the first time. The last time I saw you, I just had to brag on First Educational Resources. The last time I saw you, you weren't a one-man show. You had 6 tables stretched across an exhibit hall with a team of what seemed like 8 or 10 people. And as people walked in, they were getting these wristbands that would, light up and glow. And you had pretty much any kind of question you would have over any curriculum, math or reading or standards-based grade, there was somebody there ready to explain to you solutions that were available through first ed resources and people that could come and help you with that kind of training in your school. So, brother, I just want to say kudos, Garth. You have done such great work as an educator who has implemented change as a teacher, as a leader, as a principal, as a district leader. But you've also done that in the work that you've done with the First Educational Resources. So I'm saying that because I refer often people to you, and so and I'm just so proud of your good work. Um, how
We
can
appreciate that, Will. And
yeah.
the one thing I think that over time, as districts and leaders have gotten to know us as an organization, one thing that we pride ourselves on, and you've obviously noticed that at the national conferences or in the work that we do, is we truly do customize everything we do for schools. And I think that's why people have been very responsive and why we keep gaining more partnership districts. Because I remember, and listeners, I think a lot of you can probably relate to this. I remember sitting in professional development as a teacher, or I remember sitting in professional development as a principal, or hiring people to come in and work with our staff from the outside. And the one reason why we started this company in the first place was a lot of the time there was a disconnect. There was a disconnect between what people say you should be doing in your schools and the reality that our teachers and our administrators are facing in the classroom.
Mm.
And so I appreciate you sharing that. And I do think that's why we've gained traction, Will, is because we are authentic in everything that we do. We listen to the needs of the schools. We understand the direction that they're coming from. We want to know their realities. And then we build plans around that, not what we want them to do, but where they want to go. And I do believe that's why you've seen that. So even when you saw our team there and being able to answer questions around literacy or instructional coaching or math or collective efficacy or PLCs, assessment and grading, it really is grounded in that. And I think as we go into talk a little bit about the book, that's also where the book came. The book came from the realities that we have experienced working with schools, both when all of us were in our own school districts as educators, and then, post that scenario where we've been out now and helping school districts all over the globe transition their assessment and grading practices. It's all grounded in the realities of what we hear from educators on a daily basis. So I did want to share that because that is something I'm incredibly proud of our team. We would not be where we are without all of them. And also just in great partnerships like yourself, Will, that are people willing to make others aware of what we do.
Well, that's huge because you're right. I think leaders often will sit across from looking for resources that will help them grow with their teachers or their leaders, and there can be a disconnect between what people say they're going to do and what they actually do. And so that's why I know you've been so purposeful in attracting people to your team who have done the work. And so I want to start here because there are listeners who are going to be both being introduced to this conversation and others who've been swimming in this for a long time. So first, give us a history lesson, a little history lesson, because I want to be able to dive into the book. But can you explain how standards-based grading has been shifting the way schools are assessing student learning? Because I'm going to have listeners who still have very traditional forms of grading practices and others who are swimming in this world of standard-based grading already. But give us a little history lesson, including your own, because you've walked through this history personally.
Yeah, I mean, most people are a little surprised to find out that standards-based grading in these conversations actually go back 50 plus years. And when we sit back and think about that and say, wait a second, we're just beginning the conversation now in our school district around a concept that has been around for a very long time. And I do want to take a moment and acknowledge people that I put on a pedestal in terms of the work they've done in this arena. People like Dr. Tom Guskey, Rick Wormley, Ken O'Connor. I would say probably those are the ones that I know I learned the most from at going through this. But I mean, Tom Guskey's been doing research on this and talking about this since the 1980s, and yet we're still having this conversation in schools. And for me, I think it's because we're at the point where we continually have evidence to indicate that the traditional approaches to how we assess students, how we give them feedback, how we report that learning to them via grade books or report cards hasn't necessarily been as meaningful as maybe what we once thought. We thought we were telling a good story from how we were grading using that traditional model. But if I think now, even as a parent, giving me a score of a kid getting an 88% in Algebra 1, that's great. I know that he's probably doing okay, or she's probably doing okay. But what is it that they're missing? What are the gaps there? And that's really where this has come from. And I do want to say, I think Ken O'Connor, in his most recent edition of a repair kit for grading 15 fixes for broken grades, he introduced a new acronym as far as a rationale and reason. And I do believe that it has helped frame the need for change in schools. And that acronym is CALM, CALM. And he asked districts to consider this question. And this was something that I wish, as a leader, when we first embraced the taking on this work, I knew it was the right thing. I knew what we were doing wasn't meeting the needs of our students in the way we wanted them to. But I still didn't quite have that right framework to say, here's why, right? Here's why we should change. And what CALM stands for: consistent, accurate, learning focused, and meaningful. And we pose a couple questions where we say, all right, do we believe as building level leaders, or even district level leaders, do we believe that the grades we determine for our students are consistent from classroom to classroom, are accurate to learning, meaningful for students and their caregivers, and then obviously focused on learning? And I think if we all sit back and just do a little bit of a reflective look at that, I think anything that we were doing, and that's not to shame and blame. I mean, I had the most traditional grade book as a high school teacher that you could come across, but we know better now. We know that the way one teacher determines a grade should not be different than the way another teacher determines a grade. We know that those lead to inequities for our students. And so, the conversations have been around a long time. I think where it's gaining traction, quite honestly, Will, is that, obviously there was a lot of negative that came out of the pandemic, but one of the things I do believe that brought to light for schools from the pandemic, when students were kind of at home learning and we were asking our teachers to have to rethink assessment, is to realize that maybe what we were using for assessments and maybe what we were communicating in relation to student feedback wasn't as meaningful as what we'd want it to be. So, and even if we really want to go back, as Tom Gusky would say, the idea of kind of mastery learning goes back to the Benjamin Bloom days. And so we're really talking about a process that's been talked about, but also very emotional, right? Because the reality for most schools, and why it's taking as long as it is to get there, is everybody, all of our parents experience their form of grading that they understand. And so if something begins to look a little bit different, there's definitely some resistance that comes to that. So I know that was kind of a longer answer to the history, but it really does. We're talking now, 50 years of research, 50 years of conversation, but I am very optimistic, as our Stagger Center at first, Stagger, and just what we need, another acronym in education, right? But Stagger standing for Standards, Targets, Assessment, Grading, and Reporting. As we continue to get more and more school districts that are reaching out and saying, we really want to reconsider how we assess and grade our students. Can you help us through some of these pitfalls? Can you help us through some of these challenges? That makes me excited, because it means that leaders now are willing to confront some of the potential pushback or challenges that they exist. They know that it is now worth that opportunity to put themselves out there a little bit and create more, as we said, consistent, accurate, learning focused, and meaningful grades.
That's such a great acronym. Thanks for that. Consistent, accurate to learning. What was the third one?
Learning focused.
Learning focused, and then
and
meaningful. Consistent, accurate, learning focused, and meaningful. One of the thoughts that I was having before we jumped into this conversation, Garth, was about climate and culture. When you think about those two words, they often are defined in different ways. But, and I don't know if this is helpful, but at least this is the way my brain works. When I travel, for instance, to another place, for instance, by the time this recording comes out, I will have spent part of my summer in Wales, because my daughter's graduating from university there. And
fantastic.
She lives on the West Coast there. There's a different climate there because there's enough ocean water that it almost never snows, even in the coldest weather. So you adjust to the climate that you're in, but the culture is something that runs even deeper because it's something that's connected to language and history and tradition and religion. And every school has its climate and culture too. And I think part of the reason that this conversation leads to so much resistance is because we live within the climate and cultures that we've inherited,
Mhm.
and we don't often have an opportunity to step outside of them and ask, who are they benefiting and who are they not? And when you begin to ask that question as a teacher, if you apply calm, even in just your own classroom, is my grading, are my grading practices consistent, accurate, learning focused, and meaningful? You have to really assess how, therefore, whatever you're placing in that grade book reflects those concepts. So I want to take this conversation two directions now. And so I'm going to actually ask you to address two leaders.
Absolutely.
Leader one is the leader who's attempting to introduce their school to think about this. You know, let's examine our culture. And so I want you to speak to that leader first, and then the second leader I want you to speak to is someone who's already been in this process for a long time, but is getting either pushback or they're communicating mixed messages. So leader one, I'm attempting to introduce standards-based grading to my school community. How might this book or your others help me to know what to do and what not to do?
Well, I think, and like I said, then there's a lot of really great resources out there, Will, on this. I would definitely recommend if you're looking for a variety of resources, and that was something I had to do as well. As I try to be as big a consumer of the different resources that were out there around assessment and grading reform at the time when we were going through it in our school district, just because there are a lot of perspectives out there. And I think I do want to make sure that's really clear for all of your listeners to know, is I'm here to offer a perspective. And there's a lot of really other great perspectives out there. And there's also some perspectives that I don't think necessarily I understand their thoughts and beliefs, but when it comes to living those, maybe not so much. But, a book I would say that would be, before even reading Extinguishing the Fires, would definitely be Ken O'Connor's book, when we look at a repair kit for grading, because it just speaks to some of the current practices that are taking place within a school. And if I'm a new leader, or even if I'm a veteran leader, and we're coming up against some potential resistance to this, one way that I found is incredibly helpful to drive this conversation is through this question: do the policies, actions, procedures in our building when it comes to assessment and grading match the words that are on our wall? And what I mean by that is, I think, Will, I think we can both agree that almost every school out there, at least all the schools I work with, have some form of a mission, vision, and vision statement, maybe a value statement, something like that. And typically what I learned, and this was a huge piece for us in retrospect, what I learned is that in those mission statements, we usually speak to being able to support the needs and develop the talent of every single kid that walks into our buildings. Doesn't matter what their circumstances are, that we are going to give every single kid what they need. So if that's the case, and we then take a step back and analyze our current practices around assessment and grading, frequently we will realize that there's a misalignment. There's a misalignment between what we say we're about and what we're actually doing. And so for somebody that's just trying to figure out where to start in this conversation, I'd ask that question. I'd want to know, what are we currently doing in terms of assessment and grading? I'll give you an example, Will, and we talk about this in the book because it's definitely a fire that we run up across. The notion of retakes or reassessment. That is a big one that we see in schools, where we sometimes get a little bit of resistance from teachers, sometimes we get a little bit of resistance from parents, even sometimes from admin. And here, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, this idea of the real world, and you don't get second chances in the real world. Well, if our mission is to be able to help develop the talent and support the needs of every single student, and we all recognize that not every single kid learns at the exact same rate at the exact same time or in the same way, well, then why wouldn't we offer the opportunity for them to demonstrate their learning a second or third time when they are in the right position to show that? So all of a sudden we have someone that says, well, we don't allow retakes. Okay, we don't allow those. You got to be ready for the test when it's October 16th. You got to be ready for that test right now. And so we give that test. We know that kids aren't learning. We move on to the next unit. We don't give them an opportunity. Now we have a misalignment between what we say we're about, the words on the wall, or wherever it is that's in your school or in your district, and the actions that we're engaging in. So for a new leader, I think it's kind of taking a step back and just assessing the reality of what actually is happening in our building. I remember the first time I started to just go in and take a look at grade books and say, okay, because I know when I was first a teacher, we were independent contractors. Let's be honest, right? You close the door to your classroom, you set your grading practices, you set, how much formative assessments are worth, whether you're point-based, percentage-based. You could kind of do whatever you wanted. But if we take a step back and say, okay, well, that's what it looked like in my classroom. But now if I go to the classroom right next door, even maybe a kid having the same exact class as me, and it's an entirely set of different criteria for how they're being graded, now again, we have a misalignment. We have inaccurate issues that lead to much longer term problems that we see. Things like, remediation rates within the universities when students are graduating and going off, or even putting some of our students in a disadvantage to what they want to do post high school because of that variation in practices. So one, do the actions that you currently engage in within your building match what you say you're about? And then doing a reality check, do an assessment, go into a couple different grade books and see what you're seeing. Talk to your teachers, ask them questions. What goes into your grade? Do you allow for these things? Do you not? And you will quickly realize that we have a lot of variation going on within our buildings.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Over 1 million teachers use IXL in their classrooms every day for one reason. They love it. Why? IXL is where the magic happens. With just one platform, teachers can personalize learning for every student. IXL gives teachers all the tools they need to enhance and differentiate instruction without adding work to their plates. Plus, IXL has decades of expertise and is proven to be effective. Studies on more than 70,000 schools across 45 states show that those who use IXL outperform others on state tests. Ready to bring the magic to your school? Visit ixl.com/PM to learn more. Support for Principal Matters comes from EduSkills. Let's face it, many schools are trying to support their Title III and multilingual programs on their own. And if that's you, it's time to take your support to the next level with EduSkills. EduSkills is designed by former educators as a go-to platform for support for K-12 multilingual programs. They understand the value of multilingual students, and they give educators the tools that they need to help all students succeed. From improving language acquisition to boosting family engagement, EduSkills offers cutting-edge tech and services for districts of all sizes. With easy setup and ongoing support, they'll make sure your transition is smooth and effective and that more students are receiving better services. Ready to get started? Visit eduskillsllc.com or call 405-879-9898 to schedule a demo. EduSkills, breaking barriers and building bridges for multilingual education. I agree. There's just so much I would like to sit on this, but I'll just make one observation and then I want to get to leader number 2. But I've heard you say several things. Do the policies, actions, procedures, and our grading systems match the mission statements on our walls? And there is something really powerful about consistency. Don't just go back to that acronym about consistency, accuracy, learning focused and meaningful practices. And I don't think I've even realized until I was a much older educator how fortunate I was when in my very first school to be assigned to as the newest member of a very established department of English teachers, and a school where they had created some strong norms before I ever got there. So they introduced me to curriculum mapping. They introduced me to identifying which standards my students needed to be covering throughout the year, and to consistent practices so that we could, again, so kids could, when they're moving from class to class, encounter some consistent grading practices. And I don't even think I realized at the time, Garth, because I was being introduced to it, that I was stepping into a very healthy introduction to what grading can look like. However, I will say that as a teacher, it took me a long time to realize that what I needed to grade was not, how do I, and this is, I know, diving into parts of your book as well, but learning how to grade, really learning how to measure learning,
Mhm.
not just presence or not behavior or not, and so those are the distinctions I think that have made your work so helpful. Now, I want to just encourage listeners, if you're a part of that group, one, to go back to, you know, Repair Kit for Grading from Ken O'Connor, or check out Garth's other books, because you've written some great books with Professional Learning Communities 2.0 and learning centered grading practices. But now I want to talk to that leader number two, because I really feel like this is where your newest book is addressing the leader whose school community is already implementing and practicing standard-based gradings, but they're realizing we are communicating mixed messages to our community. Our teachers aren't all on the same page, or we're getting political pushback because parents or maybe district leaders don't like, or board members don't like what we're doing. And so how do you help that leader to navigate this pathway and extinguish those fires, as you would call them?
Absolutely. I think, and first of all, if you are a leader that's started down that pathway and you're taking on assessment and grading reform, first and foremost, thank you, because I've yet to come up against a scenario or talk or meet or work with a principal or a district level leader that says, well, that was just the most smooth process we've ever experienced. There's always going to be a little bit of resistance.
Mhm.
There's always going to be some, what I will say, will, a lot of misinformation that leads to some of that resistance. So if you're a veteran leader, or if you're a leader that even is newer but going down this pathway, first and foremost, communication is of the utmost importance. Do not leave students and their caregivers out of the conversation. If you bring the kids into the conversation, help them understand why we're going down this with, even if you don't know what it looks like yet, if you don't know what the end result is, we don't know if there's going to be a change in how our report cards look, or what our learning management system looks like. Begin to educate them throughout the process. Where I have seen things go really, really wrong, and at that point, well, this book can't even help people,
Mhm.
is when we get to the point where at full implementation and we notify the students and the parents 2 days before the school year starts that we've
Oh,
switched our
good
grading
Lord.
practice. That is where you get people showing up at school board meetings, and that's where you actually get school boards reversing anything that you're doing in your buildings and
Yeah.
going back to very traditional models. So that's the first just warning around that, is make sure of that. But when it comes to the challenges, what I've observed over my years of when I was still in the classroom or in the buildings, or now doing this work and going on and working with schools, is that this is probably one of the more controversial changes that we see in schools. Yes, there's been a lot of discussions over the last couple of years around some newer things happening in schools. But if we think about something that our parents are the most familiar with, and as you said, when you think to the culture, Will, of a community, the culture of the building, a lot of it is grounded in what they experience, right? So
Mhm.
whether that's parents that went to your school and they really understand that culture, or just the fact that they've been to school, they feel like they're kind of, especially in the area of grading, that they already have their knowledge base
Mhm.
of what this looks like. So don't move that cheese on me, because I'm comfortable with this. I know this. Even though if we actually ask them to do the same reflective questions, would they say, is what's being communicated to you meaningful? You might get a little bit of a different answer.
Right.
But so within any of this, and the need for change, yet some of the pushback, this book is based on 16 real scenarios that all of
Mhm.
us have gone through when supporting schools in this process. And what I would say, the reason why I believe this book is very helpful. First, I wish I had this book when we were going through it,
Mhm.
because as much as I read all of the resources out there, there wasn't something like this. Like, when you encounter this challenge, and you will, what are some ways I can overcome that? How can I work through it? And that's why we call them the fires. There are different fires that are going to pop up throughout your entire process. Some of those really, really big and could almost completely halter all progress. Some of those may be a little bit minor. So we designed this with, these are the fires you can experience. So you might look through this and look through the table of contents and be like, yep, that's one that I either already am in the middle of or I can anticipate is coming. Great. That's a good one to help you through. We've not only identified the fire, but given ways, like real examples of how you work through that with your students, with your staff, with your community, with your school boards, to be able to overcome that and make sure that we, as we always say, extinguish that fire and continue to move and grow forward. So for the groups that are in the thicker part of the weeds here, I would say name your challenges, and I believe that there will be, for the most part, a way to be able to use the resources and the ideas and the thoughts within this book to help you through that and continue to get to that end goal.
I agree, and it's brilliantly organized because you guys and your co-authors really just take every chapter as a different question that you've been challenged on, and you provide an answer, and then you provide practical things. So questions from this won't work in my content area to my current assessments work just fine to if I don't put it in the grade book, parents will think we're not doing anything. You guys address it all. But the question that I want to ask you to focus on as we wrap up, Garth, is a chapter you authored, because this is something, especially because I did a lot of work in secondary and I still work with a lot of secondary leaders. The common question that I hear, and I know you do too, these changes won't prepare students for college or the real world. So give us a little reflection on what listeners could learn from that chapter.
Well, I think Will, that one, and just, you picked probably my favorite chapter in the entire book. And I know I'm biased because I also authored that chapter, but it's just one that we hear in every single school that we go into, especially and when we think about the ideas of giving kids multiple opportunities to demonstrate their learning, or that we're going to say, wait a second, we're not going to penalize them academically because they missed the deadline, but in the real world you have deadlines. We agree there are deadlines in this idea of the real world. But the first thing for leaders I would challenge you to think about is that when that fire comes up and people want to say in the real world, I'd love for us to maybe be able to change the verbiage of a little bit of that, because, and I did this as a classroom teacher, and I wish I could go back and apologize to every single kid that I taught. I used to use that phrase, the real world, all of the time. When you get out of high school and you're in the real world, this is what life is going to be like. And we weaponize this. We put this, we almost scare tactic for our kids to say when they leave us, this is what it looks like. But if I reflect back on the last 5-10 years, societally, our kids are living in a very real world right now. I don't care if that's elementary, middle school, or high school. Our kids are living in a very real world. So if we want to at least, if we can change that to, will this prepare them for what life is like when they're no longer in our schools? Great. Let's have that debate and dialogue all day. But for leaders, I hope, and again, I'm saying this guilty as charged. I used to say this all the time, but I'm hoping we can change that language a little bit, because our kids are living in a very real world. When it comes to the idea of the assessment and grading changes and how this applies to the real world, I want to give you an example, Will, that is still probably one of my favorites that I experienced as an educator. And we talk a little bit about this in the book. In our high school, when we went through this entire process, when I was in a district level role, we had a group of seniors that graduated. So what happened in our district, we moved away from kind of weighted classes. We moved to a proficiency-based model for grading. And so if our seniors went through their entire high school career, go through their high school career, and they're pretty much proficient across the board on those academic outcomes, and they've earned the right to be a valedictorian. We actually have multiple valedictorians every year. And so it's not uncommon in our school to have anywhere between 5 and 10, or even a few more, but probably between 5 and 10 people that have met that criteria. And so nobody, though, at a graduation wants to hear 5 or 10 valedictorian speeches. So what we actually do is we have the students, they give a combined speech. And at the time, this group that got up to give their speech, it was probably a group that had been through a group of high school graduating seniors that had been through more change when it came to assessment and grading than any other class that had come up. They had been in a very traditional model when they were in middle school. Then we transitioned to a 12-point scale transitioned from a 12-point scale to a 3-point scale for proficiency. We introduced retakes and reassessment. We separated academics from behaviors and reported that if there was a group that had been through a lot, it was this group, Will. And as they were getting ready to give their speech, the first student that went, she, did the traditional welcome. And I need to note that in past years, there had always been a few little jokes about the grading changes that our school had gone through. Like there's just always a little bit of a, just kind of lighthearted joke. But when this group got up there and the first student said, welcome, graduating class of X year, for this year's speech, we're going to look at life through the lens of a retake. And Will, I kid you not, I broke out in a full sweat. I was sitting in the back of the field house and I'm like, oh no, the entire speech is going to be about this. And I started thinking through everything, all of the resistance we had to what we were doing. And I thought we had the right things in place for our kids. And I thought they'd embrace it. In fact, Will, and I know our listeners can't see this, I, in the middle of graduation, went on my phone and started looking at WeCan in Wisconsin. That's the Wisconsin Employment Network for Educators. Okay. So, all right. So this is how much I was panicking in the moment. And she said, look, what we've been doing at our high school the last couple years with retakes and these changes that we're doing, this is life. And she said, in life, we are going to fail over and over again. And it's how we respond to the failure. It's how we recover from the failure. It's what we're willing to do that is going to make us stronger. And everything that we've been doing in this high school through the lens of retakes and making sure teachers making sure that we are proficient in what we need to be so we can be successful when we leave. That is life. Now, Will, what I will tell you, and I actually still get goosebumps when I think about this speech. I then started to change my posture a little bit, maybe try to get the attention of a few crowd members in the audience that had said some not so nice things about me on Facebook as we were going through these changes. I'm like, okay. And then it became just a moment of just proudness of the kids got it. The kids understood. This is what we're advocating within standards-based learning assessment grading practices. That is life. Life is about, here's a skill and I need to get there. And if I don't get there in our jobs, if we, if I have to, Will, we both do writing, right? If we miss a deadline for our editors, they don't just say, okay, go ahead and stop writing. They're like, we need to get this from you. Keep at it. What do you need? What do you need for support? And you go through and you do that, or you turn it in and it's not there. We've both written dissertations, probably one of the most brutal things we've ever gone through. I remember there was like 800 different changes I had to make to it, but we did it and had a chance to recover from not having it where we needed it to be. That is the quote, and I hate to use that word, that's the real world. And so when we look at these changes, I think we have to establish, what does preparedness look like? So yeah, maybe a college or university doesn't allow retakes. Great. It's on us then to make sure that we close every gap possible when the kids are with us, so that they can be successful when they leave and go off to the university or workforce or military, whatever it may be. That's our role. That's what's going to put them in the best position to be successful. Not saying, sorry, you should have learned it at this time. Now we're going to create a bigger gap in your learning. So as you can tell, I get a little bit more animated because this is just such a passionate piece, because everything about life, if we want to look at, there's nothing that happens in life that looks like traditional grading. Nothing. Even I just had to go in for my annual physical not too long ago, because my wife said it's been way too long and I need to make sure I do it. And when they took my blood work, they gave me 7 different numbers based on what they were testing within the blood. I didn't get a 87% healthy blood. I got, here are the different things with it, and here's something that you need to be aware of and focus on. So everything in life is much more aligned with being able to give accurate, meaningful feedback on where kids are in each of those learning and behavioral outcomes that we're aiming for. Well, I'm sorry, I could keep talking about this all day, but
I'm so glad that you told that story, and I love that feedback, Garth. Principal Matters listeners, the book is Extinguishing: The Fires Within Assessment and Grading Reform. And as we wrap up, Garth, I just want to add one thought. I know we're going longer than my episodes sometimes go, but it's my show. I can go as long as I want.
And I talk a lot, as my wife says, so.
No, we both do. But just yesterday, I was on the phone with, I have a nephew who decided to, at the age of 30, change careers. He has a music degree. He was in music instruction, but he decided instead that he wanted to start a military career, and now he is becoming a flight officer in the U.S. Navy. So talk about a crazy trajectory change. But we were on the phone a couple of days ago, and he was explaining that they gave them an assessment of how each person is ranking in the class of 20 something officers that he's training with right now. And he was like, Uncle Will, I've been scoring in the 90th, all of my grades are in that area. So I'm kind of a low A student. He said, but that's actually placed me in the lowest 25% of my class. And he said, and I was getting really discouraged about that until I realized I'm the oldest guy in this class and I'm the only one with a family. And so, and I've been out of college for 10 years, but I'm still making a 90% in this class, even though these kids that just came out of the Naval Academy are doing so much better than me. And that thought went through my mind, which is, it's so weird how we can take even the highest achieving people, because every one of those guys and girls are high achievers.
Right.
They're all going to be flight officers or pilots. And yet we want to put them in some kind of ranking system that makes them then question, am I failing, when they're actually being successful?
Right.
And so as teachers, we have to ask ourselves that question too. How are the systems that we're using reflecting back to our students where they're being successful and how they're achieving? He had to do that mind shift for himself because it wasn't coming from the system. And I'm not saying that as a criticism over his training. I'm just saying that we've inherited systems that often, and I just can't get away from thinking about Carol Dweck's growth mindset research, that because what she's discovered is that when you tell yourself the narrative that I have failed and there's no chance for me, or I'm not good at this, you actually shut down the ability of your brain to learn.
Right.
When you tell yourself the narrative, I didn't learn this yet, but I bet I can, or let me try again, then there are actually neurons. I mean, the brain research shows you're actually connecting new cells are being developed in your brain because of that kind of narrative. And so this is why you're so passionate, Garth. You want schools to be a part of a learning environment that encourages growth. And that growth can't happen if the system is giving us a narrative to students that's telling them they can't grow.
Absolutely.
And so this isn't about trying to convert people into some new radical way of grading. This is about rethinking the way we approach grading within our classrooms and across our schools and across our districts, so that we're helping students hold on to that belief about themselves that we can grow. So as we wrap up, I want you to tell listeners any parting thoughts and then how they can stay connected with you, because I guarantee people are going to want to reach out to connect with you, Garth.
Well, and thank you for sharing that story, Will, and that connection of the growth mindset. Because really what we're really trying to get at with this is, how do we keep that window of opportunity open for our students? How do we make sure that they recognize that it is through, and again, that we have to have processes in place. We're not just saying it's free for all grading and that some of these things don't matter. We have to have processes, but we have to keep that window of opportunity open. I think one thing, just as we conclude, and it was kind of speaking to this as well, of that it's not this big, crazy radical change. Often people think that you can't reform your grade efforts if you're still giving some form of like a letter grade in your high schools. Well, we actually have a chapter that talks about that, where we can actually, you can still have something that looks a little bit more traditional with letter grades, because the symbol doesn't matter. Honestly, whatever you have, a letter, a number, a Bitmoji, that does not matter. But what does matter is, what does it represent? Does it represent learning? And if that's the case, great. So you can keep some things familiar for your community. You don't have to get to this point where it looks so entirely different, but you have to change a little bit of the back end. And that's, I would say, what we do really well is, how do we help change the back end of what leads to that communication of a grade or a number or whatever it may be. In terms of staying in contact with me, first and foremost, anybody can email me, ask any questions you have. My email is garth@firsteducation-us.com. I'm sure Will have this in the notes as well. You can visit our website, www.firsteducation-us.com. Otherwise, you can connect with me on social media. My X handle is @LarsonGarth. But otherwise, I just hope to, if anybody has questions, as we said, we are very passionate about this work. We support schools in a variety of ways, and I'd love to continue the conversation.
Well, Garth, Larson, thank you for extinguishing fires within assessment and grading. And thank you for this new book. Principal Matters listeners, there will be links to the book and to Garth's contact information. But Garth, I appreciate you, your leadership, and the way you're inspiring schools to keep serving students. And Principal Matters listeners, we appreciate you. Thank you for listening and for doing what matters. We'll talk to you again next week. You'll find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academies, Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations for my books, as well as for Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.